The production statistics that would ultimately doom the U-boat force were already accumulating by spring 1943, though German intelligence grossly underestimated the scope and scale. Henry Kaiser's shipyard in Vancouver, Washington, had accomplished something that traditional naval architects considered impossible. They had reduced the construction time for a Casablanca-class escort carrier from 6 months down to 10 weeks. By standardizing components and applying assembly line techniques borrowed directly from automobile manufacturing, Kaiser's workforce could launch a new escort carrier every single week by summer 1943. German intelligence officers, working with incomplete information and assumptions based on traditional naval construction, estimated American escort carrier production at perhaps 1 vessel per month, possibly less. The actual reality was closer to 1 new escort carrier entering service every 5 days during peak production periods. Kapitan Lieutenant Peter Creamer was commanding U-333 on April 23, 1943. When he experienced the first genuine glimpse of what American mass-produced naval aviation would mean for submarine warfare. His boat was running on the surface approximately 650 miles southwest of Ireland, well within the mid-Atlantic gap that had traditionally been safe from air attack. The lookout's sudden cry sent the entire crew scrambling to action stations, aircraft approaching from the northeast. But this made no sense. No land-based aircraft possessed the range to reach this position. Then Creamer saw them through his binoculars. 2 Avenger torpedo bombers, clearly carrier-based aircraft, heading directly toward his position. His war diary entry captured the confusion and concern. Aircraft at impossible range from any land base. The only logical explanation would be a fleet carrier operating in the area, but no fleet carrier had been reported anywhere near this sector. He ordered an immediate crash dive. Depth charges detonated close enough to cause minor damage throughout the boat. After remaining submerged for 2 hours, he cautiously surfaced to find the convoy still visible on the horizon, accompanied by what appeared to be a converted merchant vessel actively launching aircraft. The question he recorded in his diary would haunt him. How many of these ships did the Americans actually have? The answer to Creamer's question, had he known it, would have shattered whatever morale remained in the U-boat force. By May 1943, the United States Navy had already commissioned 11 escort carriers with 40 more under various stages of construction. Each carrier operated between 24 and 30 aircraft, depending on the specific class and mission requirements. The pilots flying these aircraft were predominantly reservists, men who had been civilian workers just 2 years earlier, trained through abbreviated programs that would have horrified traditional naval aviators with their emphasis on speed over depth. Yet these amateur pilots flying from converted merchant ships were about to accomplish what the Kriegsmarine had declared strategically impossible. They were going to achieve the complete suppression of the U-boat threat across the entire Atlantic Ocean. Rear Admiral Julius Führer found himself reviewing German naval intelligence reports in June 1943 with growing concern about the increasing frequency of U-boat encounters with carrier aircraft in areas that had previously been considered safe from air attack. His analysis, which would be found in captured German documents after the war, revealed a dawning awareness of the magnitude of the shift. American escort carriers were now being reported operating in the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, and along the Mediterranean approaches. Intelligence assessments, still conservative and understated, suggested at least 20 operational vessels. If these numbers proved accurate, Führer noted, this would represent a fundamental alteration in convoy protection capability that would require an immediate and comprehensive reassessment of Wolfpack tactics. The reassessment came too late to matter. USS Bogue and her escorting destroyers had already begun what U-boat crews would later refer to as the extended Black May period, a prolonged nightmare of relentless hunting that never seemed to end. On May 22, 1943, Bogue's aircraft spotted U-569 running on the surface during what should have been safe daylight transit. The submarine executed an emergency crash dive, but the Avenger aircraft marked the exact position with a smoke float before the boat completely disappeared beneath the waves. What followed was 4 hours of coordinated attacks, with aircraft maintaining constant contact while directing surface escorts to the target. U-569's commander, Captain Lieutenant Hans-Peter Hinch, managed to surface his dying boat just long enough to transmit a final radio message back to headquarters. Under continuous air attack. Carrier aircraft maintaining contact despite all evasion attempts. No escape possible. Scuttling vessel. Admiral Donitz himself reviewed the message with initial skepticism, suspecting possible British deception or misinformation. Only when 2 more boats reported nearly identical experiences within days did the reality begin penetrating the layers of German naval consciousness that had been built on years of successful operations. Continuous air attack in the mid-Atlantic had been strategically impossible according to every assessment, every calculation, every operational plan. Yet experienced commanders with proven track records were reporting exactly that phenomenon, and their reports couldn't all be dismissed as panic or incompetence. Captain Lieutenant Klaus Rudloff commanded U-709 when he encountered aircraft from USS Kor on June 24, 1943. His subsequent report revealed the tactical revolution that was already fundamentally altering submarine warfare beyond recognition. His boat had been attacked by carrier aircraft approximately 700 miles from the nearest land-based airfield. Forced to remain submerged for 14 consecutive hours, the boat's battery reserves had been completely exhausted. When he surfaced at night to recharge batteries, which had always been safe procedure, aircraft immediately detected the boat using what appeared to be some kind of detection equipment that worked in complete darkness. The aircraft seemed to possess unlimited persistence, maintaining contact and directing surface ships regardless of evasive maneuvers. Rudloff's report ended with a request that would haunt German naval command. He asked for instructions on how to deal with continuous air coverage. There were no instructions available because German naval doctrine had never contemplated the possibility of continuous air coverage in mid-ocean areas. The entire U-boat operational concept depended on the ability to surface regularly for battery charging, high-speed transit, and attack positioning. Operating in hunter-killer groups with 3 to 4 destroyers accompanying each escort carrier, the Americans could maintain dawn-to-dusk surveillance over a radius exceeding 100 miles. When multiple escort carriers operated in coordinated groups, they created overlapping surveillance zones that made any surface operations absolutely suicidal for submarines. The technical capabilities of these American escort carriers significantly exceeded what German intelligence had estimated. Each Casablanca-class carrier displaced approximately 7,800 tons and measured 512 feet in overall length. The flight deck could handle aircraft weighing up to 20,000 pounds landing at speeds approaching 80 miles per hour. The hangar deck accommodated 28 aircraft along with complete maintenance facilities, including machine shops and spare parts storage. Ammunition magazines held sufficient depth charges, bombs, torpedoes, and 500,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition to support 2 weeks of continuous combat operations without resupply. Corvette Captain Adelbert Schnee ranked among Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders when he encountered this new reality on July 13, 1943. U-201 was caught on the surface by aircraft from USS Kor with virtually no warning. His post-action report revealed the shock and disorientation. Aircraft appeared without any advance warning. There was insufficient time for a proper crash dive. He ordered the boat to maximum depth immediately. Multiple depth charges detonated close enough to cause significant damage. The boat remained at maximum depth for 6 consecutive hours. When he finally surfaced after dark, assuming darkness would provide protection, the submarine was immediately illuminated by aircraft equipped with powerful searchlights. This pattern repeated 3 times throughout the night. The aircraft seemed to know exactly where the submarine would surface each time. What Schnee couldn't have known was that Kor aircraft carried ASV Mark III radar systems capable of detecting a surfaced submarine at 15 miles distance in complete darkness. This equipment, combined with powerful Lee lights for illumination and acoustic homing torpedoes that could track submarines underwater, meant that darkness no longer provided any protection whatsoever. U-boat crews had always depended on night surface operations for battery charging and high-speed transit to attack positions. Now every single moment spent on the surface, regardless of time or weather conditions, invited immediate death from aircraft that could see in the dark. The production miracle enabling this comprehensive transformation defied German comprehension at every level. Kaiser Shipbuilding produced their 50th escort carrier, USS Casablanca, in November 1943, just 18 months after laying the first keel of the class. The ship was built in exactly 101 days from initial keel laying to formal commissioning and delivery to the Navy. Every single component had been standardized. Parts manufactured in 267 separate factories spread across 32 different states arrived at the shipyard on precise schedules coordinated down to the hour. Assembly proceeded continuously, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, with multiple shifts maintaining constant progress. Workers who had never built ships before the war were now producing carriers that would sweep German submarines from the seas. German intelligence officer Fregattenkapitän Hans Mechel found himself analyzing American shipbuilding capacity in December 1943, producing a report that Admiral Donitz initially rejected outright as defeatist propaganda. American escort carrier production appeared to exceed 1 complete unit weekly. At this rate, Mechel calculated, by mid-1944, the Americans would possess over 100 such vessels. Each carrier negated the effectiveness of multiple submarines across vast areas of ocean. If the production continued at this rate, German submarines would have nowhere left to operate safely. By January 1944, American escort carriers had evolved beyond merely defending convoys to actively hunting submarines. Hunter-killer groups centered on individual escort carriers prowled the Atlantic independently, using intelligence derived from ultra-intercepts of German radio traffic to locate U-boat patrol lines before they could intercept convoys. The hunted had become the hunters. German submarines that had terrorized the Atlantic for years now found themselves trapped in an increasingly deadly environment where they were the prey. U-boat ace, Captain Lieutenant Werner Henke commanded U-515 with a distinguished record, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, credited with 26 ships sunk. On April 9, 1944, operating north of the Azores, his boat was located by aircraft from USS Guadalcanal. Henke found himself absolutely helpless against coordinated air and surface attacks that gave him no opportunity to escape or fight back effectively. His final radio message conveyed unprecedented desperation from a decorated commander. Under attack by multiple aircraft. Cannot remain surfaced. Cannot escape while submerged. Battery reserves failing. Chlorine gas developing inside the boat from battery damage. Destroyer closing to attack range. The boat's time is up. The escort carrier Guadalcanal and her accompanying hunter-killer group had revolutionized anti-submarine warfare into something unrecognizable from pre-war doctrine. Operating independently of convoy schedules and routes, these groups could pursue U-boat contacts for days or even weeks. On this single patrol alone, Guadalcanal's group would sink 3 U-boats and damage 2 others severely enough to force them back to base. The carrier's aircraft flew 2,484 combat hours over 30 days of operations. German submarines that had once stalked merchant ships across the Atlantic now spent their patrols cowering beneath the waves, afraid to surface even at night. The technical superiority of American production extended far beyond simple numerical superiority. Each escort carrier incorporated comprehensive lessons learned from previous vessel operations. The Casablanca-class ships built in late 1943 featured improved radar systems, better communication equipment, stronger flight deck construction, and significantly enhanced crew habitability compared to earlier vessels. German observers who had expected American mass production techniques to result in inferior quality discovered exactly the opposite. The ships got better with each successive hull, not worse. Captain SOS Klaus Schultz analyzed captured American technical documents in February 1944, reporting back to U-boat command with barely concealed amazement. American escort carriers employed assembly techniques that traditional shipbuilding wisdom said should be impossible. Entire sections of the ship were completely prefabricated, down to installed equipment and complete electrical wiring. These massive sections, weighing up to 200 tons each, were lifted by enormous cranes and welded together like building blocks. Ships took shape in weeks rather than the months or years traditional construction required. Each successive vessel benefited from lessons learned during construction of previous hulls, creating a continuous improvement cycle. By March 1944, the psychological transformation of the U-boat force had reached completion. Crews that had once competed fiercely for tonnage sunk and decorations earned now celebrated the simple fact of survival. Morale had collapsed completely as experienced crews recognized their actual situation with brutal clarity. With over 50 escort carriers now operational and more launching every single month, there existed nowhere in the entire Atlantic Ocean beyond aircraft reach. Every square mile of ocean could be covered. The statistical record confirmed the magnitude of the transformation. In May 1943, before escort carriers had become fully operational across the theatre, U-boats had managed to sink 50 Allied merchant ships. By May 1944, with over 60 escort carriers actively operating, U-boats managed to sink only 5 ships while losing 25 submarines. The exchange ratio had reversed so completely that Donitz seriously considered suspending U-boat operations entirely as accomplishing nothing except the pointless sacrifice of trained crews. USS Block Island exemplified the evolution and sophistication of escort carrier tactics. Operating with 4 destroyer escorts in close coordination, Block Island pioneered night anti-submarine operations using radar-equipped Avengers that could hunt in complete darkness. On May 29, 1944, Block Island's aircraft located U-549 running on the surface at night using radar. The subsequent coordinated attack demonstrated how sophisticated American tactics had become. Aircraft maintained continuous contact while vectoring destroyers precisely to the submarine's position. When U-549 dived to escape the aircraft, sonobuoys tracked its underwater movement, directing destroyers to drop depth charges directly on target. The submarine fought desperately, managing to torpedo Block Island with a lucky shot before being destroyed by depth charges. Block Island sank, becoming one of only 6 American escort carriers lost to enemy action during the entire war. The loss of Block Island illustrated American industrial supremacy rather than any German tactical success. Block Island was replaced by 2 new escort carriers within weeks of her sinking. Her aircraft and trained aircrew transferred to other carriers with barely a pause in operational tempo. The loss meant essentially nothing to American capabilities. Gross Admiral Karl Donitz confronted this brutal reality during a staff conference held on June 2, 1944. The conference transcript, captured after the war, reveals his complete understanding of the situation. The enemy's small carriers have systematically eliminated every tactical advantage submarines once possessed. German boats cannot operate on the surface during daylight hours due to aircraft. They cannot operate on the surface at night due to radar-equipped aircraft. The Americans have not defeated German submarines through superior tactics or better training. They have rendered submarines functionally obsolete through overwhelming presence. By August 1944, the United States Navy operated 77 escort carriers with 35 additional vessels still under construction. These ships had evolved far beyond convoy protection to become offensive weapons. Operating off the European coast, escort carriers provided air support for the Normandy invasion and hunted U-boats in the Bay of Biscay. German coastal U-boat bases that had previously enjoyed immunity from naval attack now faced carrier aircraft striking from beyond the range of land-based fighters that might protect them. Technical evolution continued throughout 1944 without pause. The Commencement Bay class, larger and faster than the Casablancas, began entering service. These ships displaced 11,373 tons and could make 19 knots. Their flight decks stretched 553 feet. Each ship cost approximately $11 million and required roughly 8 months to build, still a small fraction of fleet carrier cost and construction time. German naval intelligence struggled desperately to comprehend the industrial capacity these numbers represented. Corvette and Kapitän Ernst Herrschagen analyzed American production data in September 1944, writing a report that captured the sense of overwhelming impossibility. Each individual escort carrier required approximately 30,000 tons of steel, over 2,000 miles of electrical cable, 50 miles of various piping, 80,000 separate blueprints, and 45,000 different components. Yet the Americans were producing them with the efficiency and speed of automobile assembly lines. The Seattle-Tacoma shipbuilding operation alone had delivered 16 carriers in 18 months. Captain Daniel Gallery, commanding USS Guadalcanal, achieved the ultimate demonstration of escort carrier dominance on June 4, 1944. His hunter-killer group forced U-505 to surface and managed to capture the submarine intact with its crew, codebooks, and Enigma machine, marking the first enemy warship captured at sea by the United States Navy since 1854. The submarine's seizure demonstrated conclusively that U-boats had transformed from predators into prey. The statistical record of transformation was overwhelming in its completeness. In 1942, before escort carriers became operational in significant numbers, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied merchant ships totaling approximately 6,266,000 tons of shipping. In 1944, with escort carriers dominating every area of the Atlantic, U-boats managed to sink only 132 ships totaling 773,000 tons, while losing 249 submarines. German U-boat construction couldn't remotely keep pace with these loss rates. German recognition of the transformation appeared in unexpected contexts and locations. Lieutenant Sir C. Hans Rudolf Rosing, captured from U-846 in May 1944, told his interrogators something that captured the essential reality. "We knew the war was truly lost when we started counting your escort carriers seriously. In 1943, we laughed at them as improvised jokes. By 1944, we feared them more than we feared battleships. A single escort carrier patrolling could clear an entire sector of ocean. We had nowhere left to hide." Total escort carrier production reached 151 ships by war's end, with 122 built in the United States and 29 constructed in Britain using American designs and techniques. These ships operated approximately 4,000 aircraft at peak strength, more aircraft than the entire German Luftwaffe possessed by 1944. The pilots, trained through programs that were producing 35,000 naval aviators annually, outnumbered total German U-boat crews by a factor of 3 to 1. Vice Admiral Lionel Wells analyzed escort carrier effectiveness comprehensively after the war concluded, reaching a conclusion that military historians would echo for generations. The escort carrier program represented the perfect convergence of industrial capacity, tactical innovation, and strategic necessity occurring at exactly the right moment. America built merchant ships that could launch aircraft, trained civilians to fly them competently, and fundamentally changed the nature of naval warfare. The program succeeded beyond anyone's initial projections. The human dimension emerged clearly in interrogation transcripts. Captain Lieutenant Wolfgang Haider, captured from U-575 in March 1944, told his interrogators something that explained the psychological impact. "Your escort carriers destroyed the U-boat force through sheer presence everywhere. They were everywhere, always somewhere nearby." We spent entire patrols completely submerged, seeing nothing, attacking nothing. Men went mad from the psychological stress of continuous hiding. Those little carriers you built in weeks destroyed the elite of German naval power that had taken years to develop. Admiral Royal Ingersoll, Commander-in-Chief of the Atlantic Fleet, testified before Congress in March 1945 about the program's success. The escort carrier program succeeded beyond our wildest initial expectations and hopes. We anticipated they would provide useful convoy protection. Instead, they eliminated the submarine threat entirely. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not primarily by destroyers or long-range patrol aircraft, though both helped, but by these converted merchant ships that everyone initially dismissed. The German Navy's final assessment came directly from Gross Admiral Dönitz himself in his farewell address to the U-boat force on May 4, 1945. You fought with extraordinary gallantry against absolutely overwhelming odds. The enemy's production of aircraft carriers made our continued struggle genuinely hopeless. They built carriers faster than we could possibly build submarines to replace our losses. They trained pilots faster than we could train replacement crews. They covered the ocean with aircraft until there was nowhere left for us to operate. You did everything humanly possible. The failure was not yours. Comprehensive post-war analysis revealed the full scope and scale of escort carrier operations. These ships flew over 460,000 combat sorties during the war years. Their aircraft sank or participated in sinking 53 German U-boats and 17 Japanese submarines. They provided essential air cover for every major amphibious operation conducted after 1943. Only 6 American escort carriers were lost to enemy action throughout the entire war, a remarkably low loss rate given their extensive employment. The Kaiser shipyards that produced the majority of escort carriers became enduring symbols of American manufacturing power and capability. Workers who had never built ships before the war were launching carriers at rates that peacetime professionals with decades of experience considered flatly impossible. Women comprised 27% of the shipyard workforce. African Americans represented another 15%. This diverse workforce, many completely inexperienced in shipbuilding, produced carriers that swept German submarines from the seas and helped win the war. Captain Eric Brown, a British test pilot who flew from numerous American escort carriers during combined operations, provided valuable perspective from someone who worked with the ships extensively. The Germans mocked these ships initially because they completely failed to understand the revolution they represented. One escort carrier alone was vulnerable and limited. 50 escort carriers operating together across the Atlantic made submarine operations impossible. The Germans thought about individual ship quality. The Americans thought about total ocean coverage. The Germans never grasped this fundamental difference until far too late to matter. Vergaten-Kapitän Otto Kretschmer stood as Germany's most successful U-boat ace before his capture in 1941. He watched the subsequent transformation from prisoner of war camps. Released after the war ended, he wrote extensively about what had happened. We fundamentally failed to understand that Americans approached warfare as primarily an industrial and production problem rather than a military problem. While we focused obsessively on tactics and crew quality, they focused on production rates and coverage density. The escort carriers were not individually better ships than our submarines were better boats. They were the right ships built in the right numbers for their mission. We thought modern war was fundamentally about warrior skill and superior tactics. They understood it was about factories and production. We were wrong, they were right. Rear Admiral Calvin Durgin, who commanded multiple escort carrier task groups throughout the Atlantic campaign, provided perhaps the most succinct summary. We took merchant ship hulls, added flight decks and minimal equipment, and fundamentally changed naval history. The Germans laughed initially because they saw converted merchantmen and thought we were desperate. We saw mobile airfields that could be positioned anywhere, anytime, covering previously unreachable ocean areas. They counted individual ships. We counted total coverage area and aircraft availability. The difference in perspective determined the outcome. The final bitter irony came from the highest level of German leadership. In April 1945, as the Reich collapsed around him, the head of state reportedly asked Dönitz directly why the U-boats were failing so completely. Dönitz explained about the American escort carriers and their overwhelming numbers. The leader allegedly responded by asking why Germany had not built similar vessels. Dönitz replied with brutal honesty that Germany could not build one escort carrier per week as the Americans were doing. There was no response to this reality. No answer existed. By May 8, 1945, the war in Europe ended with Germany's unconditional surrender. The U-boat force that had nearly strangled Britain in 1942 had been reduced to ineffectiveness by mass-produced escort carriers that German admirals had laughed at just 2 years earlier. In 1942, a U-boat departing on patrol had a 75% probability of returning safely. By early 1945, the survival rate had plummeted to 25%. The primary cause of this catastrophic reversal was aircraft, predominantly operating from escort carriers. Of the 40,000 German sailors who served in U-boats during the war, 30,000 died, representing a horrific 75% casualty rate. Most of these deaths occurred after escort carriers made submarine operations essentially suicidal. These men were sacrificed to a fundamental strategic misconception, the belief that American industrial capacity couldn't possibly overcome German tactical expertise and superior training. Commander George Chamberlain served aboard USS Guadalcanal throughout her combat operations and offered perspective that captured the essential truth. We weren't better sailors than the Germans. Their U-boat crews were incredibly brave and extraordinarily skilled. But we possessed endless carriers with endless aircraft. Every submarine they managed to build and deploy, we countered with multiple carriers that could hunt it relentlessly. It wasn't fair combat. It wasn't supposed to be fair. It was industrial warfare. The escort carrier program cost approximately $1.5 billion in 1940s currency. This investment destroyed the U-boat force while saving countless Allied merchant ships and their cargoes. Each escort carrier cost roughly $7 million and could protect convoys worth hundreds of millions while destroying submarines worth millions more. The return on investment was extraordinary by any measurement. Workers at Kaiser shipyards expressed justifiable pride in their achievement for the rest of their lives. Rosie Devlin, a welder who worked on 12 different escort carriers during the war, said something that resonated with her fellow workers. We knew those ships weren't pretty or elegant. They were basic and simple and utilitarian. But we also knew they worked perfectly for their mission. Every carrier we launched meant convoys would arrive safely and submarines would be hunted down. We were fighting the war with rivet guns and welding torches instead of rifles. The final accounting proved stark and undeniable. Germany began the war with 57 operational U-boats and constructed 1,162 additional submarines during the war years. They lost 785 U-boats total, with 632 lost directly to Allied action. Approximately 175 were destroyed by escort carrier aircraft or hunter-killer groups centered on escort carriers. Considering that escort carriers only became fully operational in significant numbers from mid-1943 onward, this represented extraordinary effectiveness across a relatively compressed time frame. Starting with exactly 0 escort carriers in 1941, the United States built 151 by 1945. These ships operated approximately 4,500 aircraft at peak operational strength. They flew over 460,000 combat sorties and fundamentally changed naval warfare while maintaining operational availability rates consistently exceeding 80%. The program succeeded beyond any reasonable pre-war projection. Herbert Werner commanded German U-boats and survived as one of the very few commanders to serve throughout the entire war. He provided perhaps the most honest assessment. The escort carriers killed us through overwhelming presence rather than superior technology. We could avoid individual ships through skill and tactics. We could not avoid systematic coverage across entire ocean areas. Every carrier they launched progressively shrunk our operational area until finally we had nowhere to go except down to the bottom. The transformation was inevitable once they committed to mass production. The transformation from German contempt to complete despair occurred in less than 18 months from mid-1943 to late 1944. This remarkably rapid reversal demonstrated conclusively that industrial warfare operated on completely different timescales than traditional military planning assumed. While Germany slowly and carefully improved submarine technology through incremental advances, America rapidly and massively multiplied carrier production through industrial techniques. Quality improvements couldn't compete with quantity multiplication. The German response, documented extensively in captured Kriegsmarine records, ultimately devolved into resignation. The American escort carrier program succeeded through overwhelming industrial force that we could not match or counter. They built carriers faster than we could possibly sink them. They trained pilots faster than we could shoot them down. We were defeated not by better warriors, but by better factories producing superior numbers. Individual German superiority meant nothing against systematic American coverage. The escort carriers that German admirals laughed at dismissively in 1943 had by 1945 transformed the Atlantic Ocean from a U-boat hunting ground into an Allied-controlled lake. These converted merchant ships accomplished what the Royal Navy's destroyers and corvettes alone could not achieve. They accomplished the complete suppression of the submarine threat through overwhelming presence across every operational area simultaneously. Traditional naval power couldn't match distributed industrial production. The German admirals and captains who laughed at escort carrier photographs in 1943 lived, if they survived the war, to witness these same vessels accepting U-boat surrenders in May 1945. The complete transformation took less than 2 years from initial mockery to final submission. In that remarkably brief period, American industrial capacity rewrote fundamental rules of naval warfare that had existed for centuries. Production capacity trumped tactical skill. Numbers defeated training. Coverage area mattered more than individual ship capabilities. The story concludes where it began, with German naval officers examining American escort carriers in headquarters offices and intelligence centers. But instead of laughing at their crude merchant ship construction and improvised appearance, they stood in complete silence, understanding finally and fully that these simple ships had destroyed the U-boat force more completely and thoroughly than any enemy force in naval history. American industrial might, channeled through these ungainly converted merchantmen, had transformed maritime warfare forever in ways that would echo through subsequent decades. The final testimony came from Gross Admiral Dönitz himself, speaking candidly to his remaining staff officers as Germany surrendered unconditionally. "We lost the Battle of the Atlantic not to superior seamanship or better tactics, but to superior arithmetic and overwhelming production. The Americans built escort carriers faster than we could comprehend the implications. We thought warfare was fundamentally about warriors and their skills. They understood it was fundamentally about production and logistics. We were completely wrong in our assumptions. They were absolutely right in theirs. That basic difference is why we lost everything."